Hello and welcome to Perinatal Wellbeing episode number 16. Today's episode is in honor of World Maternal Mental Health Day, which is May 4th. The goal of this day is to raise awareness of maternal mental health issues so that more women will get treatment and fewer will suffer. This is definitely what we also work for at PWO. By sharing these stories on the podcast, talking about various issues and challenges that parents face in the perinatal period, so that people listening can identify that they're experiencing similar challenges and seek support. Please talk about these issues with your family and friends, share posts on social media about maternal mental health, ask questions, email us, reach out to a healthcare provider, or just listen to stories like the ones we share on the podcast to help normalize these experiences. If you are struggling with your mental health in the perinatal period, please know you are not alone and there is a community of support ready to help you. Please email us at info@perinatalwellbeing.ca if you're looking for support or if you have questions, no matter where in the world you are. Today is part 2 of my interview with Katie Lamport. Katie is a counselor in private practice in the Barrie, Ontario area. I first met Katie when I started a new job as an addictions counselor. Katie was fully pregnant and went on maternity leave a few days later. Katie was the first person I had met that was a gestational carrier, and I thought, wow, what an amazing person. On today's episode, Katie shares about her postpartum experience after being a gestational carrier and how that was different from birthing her own children. Katie and I also explore what types of supports exist and could be helpful for surrogates and gestational carriers.
It was an abrupt ending is what I would say.
Right. Okay.
And you're right. Like, I think people didn't know what to say at the end because it's done. It's over. And they knew I was okay. So what more is there to ask? But I did find myself wanting to keep talking about it. I wanted to honor it. I wanted to honor my body for what it had just done.
Right.
Like I said, I was in awe of the female body and what it can do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it did. It was an abrupt ending. There was definitely tears, whether they were postpartum tears or just ending tears. I was teary. And then I had 4 months off because you get the maternity leave, not the parental leave, but the maternity, the 15 weeks.
Right.
And so getting to recover from any pregnancy for 4 months without a tiny baby to care for actually does allow the female body to
recover.
Heal,
wow.
to recover. Yes.
Imagine that.
I slept at night. Yeah. I went to so many different classes and pelvic floor physio. And so I did feel very grateful and thankful for that time and that recovery. So the positive is that I had such an amazing recovery. The negative is that it is an abrupt ending and there isn't really a space to just talk about that.
Right.
To just say, hey, I had a baby. Does anyone want to hear about how that went?
Right.
Because I do think, like, even I went to a exercise class for moms and babies because it was very geared to like getting the muscles in your body that have been affected by pregnancy back. So I was the only one there without a baby. And I imagine if I had lost a baby, it might feel very different to show up there without a baby. But because I hadn't lost a baby, I felt okay to say, I'm here, I'm without a baby because this is my story. But even being in that class, you feel like you want to honor this thing that you've just done, to honor your body for what it's. But I think people didn't know what to ask. They didn't know what to say because they assumed that it's awkward. And for me, it was never awkward because I said the intention was always there and the intention came into fruition. Yeah. And it's just, I think, other people's awkwardness about maybe she's not okay.
Right. What do I say? What if I say something offensive or I use the wrong language or, I don't know about how this works. So what if I ask a silly question? Right.
And I think that's true of grief in general, where people move on faster than the person. So people are done talking about it way before. So like, I just found even today talking about it, I feel good talking there's an honoring that happens when you talk about it, but people have moved on. They're no longer curious.
Right. Yeah. And they're not coming to visit you to visit your baby.
Right.
So there's also not that opportunity, like not as much opportunity to ask you like, wow, like how was the birth or how was this experience for you? Because they're not coming to visit you to see the baby.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe your close friends, of course, like are coming to see you and you're hanging out and those kinds of things. But it sounds like it would be different from when we have a newborn and people
Yeah.
are coming over to visit the baby.
And I just can't help think of people who have lost a pregnancy. To me,
Yeah.
it just stood out for me so much. Like my life resembled what that would look like on the outside, but it didn't on the inside. So I was okay to show up at these classes. I was okay to talk about it. I was okay to be
Yeah.
around other moms and babies. But as soon as there's a loss there, you still want
Right.
to be at that class where you're focusing on postpartum recovery. You still want to be, but how painful that would be. I couldn't help but think about women who have lost pregnancies and what supports aren't approachable for them.
Right. Absolutely. And how so many supports could actually just automatically become not available to them because of the feeling like I can't access that because it says it's for parents. Or, maybe this was our first pregnancy and we lost,
Right.
the baby. Or so we don't, you know, there's no baby, so we don't identify as parents. Or maybe we do identify as parents, but this group, the criteria doesn't allow for us to be there. Or, even again,
Yeah.
just language and how we talk about these things, like those have big impacts on how safe we feel to come into a space,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was like kind of leading up to the delivery, in those like last few weeks? How was that for you?
I was so excited to give birth, which is so funny because birth is such a thing all in of itself. But I was so
Absolutely.
excited to have this baby. And I think it was twofold, that the pregnancy was harder
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that there was movement, there was transition that needed to happen, which is that the baby needed to get to its parents. And
Mhm.
it had so much anticipation. I think when it's your own and you're thinking of welcoming a baby into your home, there's a bit of fear, like, will I be a good mom? What will this be like? Can I take care of a baby? Like, there's mixed emotions, where I was like, let's get this birth going.
Yeah.
And actually,
Let
funnily enough, my birthed babies, or my biological babies, were late. They were 4
Oh
and
wow.
10 days late. And this baby was 4 days early.
Oh
So yeah,
wow.
just a
Wow.
completely
Yeah.
different experience,
So
and
different.
maybe picked
Yeah.
up on the anticipation, the excitement, and
Right.
the birth was
Yeah.
really neat. It was prepared for. Actually, there was another meeting with a social worker, was at the hospital where the baby would be born. They did do some, what's everyone's expectations? What
Okay.
as the person giving birth, Katie, what are your expectations? Asking the birth or the biological parents, what are your expectations? And we were able to have a good conversation about that and get everyone's expectations on the table. But some of them can't always be met. And this is what the social worker explained to us. The intended mom, or the biological mom, wanted to hold the baby first. And we were all in agreement that that would be the best course of action. But the social worker explained, like, if the umbilical cord's not long enough, we kind of have to put the baby on Katie's belly until,
Right.
because people like to keep,
They cut the cord.
they cut the cord a bit later now, right? Because they want to keep the baby.
Yes.
So the umbilical cord was so long. It was the longest one that this hospital had ever seen. It was like wrapped around the baby, but not in a threatening way. It was just like so long.
Right.
The mom could almost hold the baby on the umbilical cord on the other side of the room.
Right.
So it just made for a really neat experience. And for me, as part of the emotional, like, this is over, watching the parents with the baby was the most rewarding thing. And the rooms weren't ready for us to move into. So we all just got to stay in the birthing suite for hours until the rooms were ready. So it was just really neat to be able to,
Oh,
there was really neat parts of the birth that made it super special.
wow. And can I ask who was in the room when you delivered?
Yeah, there was Dave was right beside me. He was my support.
Yeah.
And the baby's mom was in there, and the baby's dad chose to stay just outside of the room
Right.
and came in after the baby was born.
Right. Lovely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then also that feeling, like you said, okay, it was so lovely to see the baby, with their mom. And those after those few hours were lovely. How long did you stay in hospital after the delivery?
I stayed one night,
Okay.
I believe. I think we all stayed one night. So we all got discharged around the same time, which I guess doesn't always happen because the baby might need extra care. But I could have left right away, but I was like excited to have meals brought to me. And, like
Have a little
sleeping in
break.
the hospital when you don't have babies, it was a good sleep.
Right.
It was a really good sleep.
Right. Okay. Good to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And so then what was that experience like going home with no medal,
Yeah.
no t-shirt, no baby? Even though,
Yeah.
of course, I totally like honor and recognize, you didn't have like that intention was there from the get-go of like, I'm babysitting.
Right.
But you babysat for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was a
Yeah.
big
You're right.
preparation to babysit
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. You're
Um,
right.
so what was that like kind of, going home from this big babysitting job?
I'm going to say day one was excitement. It was like, I can't wait to go home and be back in my own body and back in my own bed, just sleep well and see my kids. And day two was tough. I went out and did a few appointments, and just even when people would say like, how are you? I just started to cry. And, once again, there's the assumption is, is she okay? Is she
Yeah.
heartbroken? I wasn't heartbroken. I was hormonal.
Right. You just
I
had a
was,
baby.
yeah. And I think that's what happens to women's bodies is that there is that quick shift in hormones, quick shift in, and then for me, it wasn't the quick shift into parenting and having a newborn. It was the quick shift into nothing,
Right.
into the role being done,
Yeah.
into that, like I said, that
Abrupt.
abrupt ending.
Right.
So that was the adjustment in the tears. And it did definitely take a few days. Like the tears were just there
Yeah.
as they are.
As they are. Yeah.
And I was aware that I'm at risk for postpartum symptoms because I did just have a baby, and there's lots of good hormones of bonding with a baby, and I wasn't bonding with a baby. So I was very aware that I might be surprised by my postpartum symptoms. So I did book in counseling. I booked in a lot of things and ended up using the counseling for something totally different because I thought that the ending of the surrogacy could bring up lots of emotions or postpartum symptoms. And it didn't, but it made me realize that when you have intention and you have agreeability and consent, and you do something major, it tends to sit well in your body. But it brought up times in my other life where I'd done hard things and there wasn't that same agreeability and consent and in information ahead of time.
Right.
And that those were still lingering. So it's interesting that I booked counseling and used it for something totally different. But it was a neat learning about just how much when we have all the information and we're prepared for something, we can do huge things. We can do lots of things. And because I was so well informed and so supported, the surrogacy sat really well with my body. Yes, there was an abrupt ending. Yes, it took some emotions to process that. Yes, I wanted to keep talking about it, but there wasn't any lingering residue.
Wow. And did any of the doctors that you were in contact with, social worker, did anyone suggest getting these mental health supports in place? Did anyone screen for your mental health, how your mental health was doing during the pregnancy or afterwards?
No, there was, like I said, one meeting with a social worker quickly. Are you sure you're ready to do this? One for prepping on the birth. And they were both great. They were both fabulous. But no, there was no assessments or how are you doing? The midwives were amazing. They were absolutely amazing. And I did have the
Yeah.
6-week follow up with them. And
Good.
they did ask, how are you doing? They were lovely. But other than that, if
Right.
I wasn't doing well, I don't know
Right.
who would have caught it if I didn't feel comfortable to reach out on my own. Like, you know how when there's a baby, you're kind of getting checked on a bit more regularly because the baby has natural appointments.
Yeah.
I don't know who would have noticed.
And so you're a counselor.
Yeah.
You're in this world. You understand mental health illness or mental illness, symptoms of mental illness, the importance of counseling, how that can be beneficial. You booked your own counseling. If you weren't in that field, would you have booked your own counseling?
I don't know. That's a really good question because it was completely my idea. Like it wasn't
Right.
suggested to me. Um, I don't know. And it's only now as we're kind of talking that I'm realizing, I don't know what the stats are to say that after a surrogacy or gestational care, your period, what your likelihood for postpartum symptoms are. I don't know the stats.
Because this is the thing too, is I talk about the system is not supporting parents and their mental health right now as it stands. And parents reach out, I know to me as a counselor, they reach out at their breaking point. I can't cope anymore. I can't hold it together. And now I need a counselor.
Right.
And so it's only when they get to that breaking point where they reach out. But why I'm just baffled that you went through this huge process of carrying a child for another family, and that the mental health screening that was there to me sounds like you said kind of for liability and to make sure that you're fit, quote unquote, to carry this baby. Like, are you mentally well enough to carry this baby? Not, are you okay? Like, do you feel okay? It wasn't
Right.
for your mental health.
Right.
It wasn't, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. They were screening, are you capable?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And even that was a quick screening.
So even in that, a lot of things can be missed. Again, if you're not in the counseling world, or you've never been assessed before, or maybe you have issues, but they've never been diagnosed, those could easily be missed.
Right. And this might be something, like I said, we didn't use an agency. It might be something that an agency would provide a bit more of, even just eyes on the situation.
Right.
I don't know. I didn't
Okay.
use one. I don't know.
Right. That's a good question and something I will definitely look into.
Okay.
So I have maybe a bit of also a darker question as well, if that's okay. I have some parents who've come to me, birthing parents who have had traumatic births or, mental health struggles post-birth. And they really felt unsupported by the system, by the medical staff around them. What's common in like all of my clients that have traumatic births is that no one asked them how they were doing emotionally. No one acknowledged that the birth was traumatic. And a lot of them too talk about like when that baby's born. And I mean, I've talked about it like in jest and stuff, but like when the baby's born, it's like, oh, no one cares about you.
Right.
Everyone's like worried about the baby.
Right.
No one's taking care of you. And even afterwards, right?
You were just the vehicle to get the baby here.
Those are exactly the words that I was going to use. Is that what you sense or have felt or have observed just in the realm of having babies? That we're just a vehicle?
I didn't feel it, but I wonder if that goes back to the consent and the like the sickness threw me because it was the thing I was the least prepared for, where everything else had a lot of communication. And I think that's true in life. It's the unexpected, the things we were the least prepared for that create the trauma. And so I can imagine for someone who has a traumatic birth, they did not go into that birth expecting trauma. And so that unexpected event, huge event, that then gets whitewashed into, but the baby's here and it's healthy and look at the baby and celebration.
Right.
I can totally imagine that would just be so invalidating and another trauma on top of a trauma.
Absolutely. And so I'm curious to know if that relates at all to post delivery, in that there is no baby there. Kind of how we touched on before. I'm just looking at it in this other lens. There is no baby there to say, like, oh, look at the baby, or we're going to come visit the baby. So, by proxy, we're visiting you. And so that kind of not having that place to talk about, but yet when you were pregnant, when you were carrying that baby, everyone's concerned and everyone's,
Right.
interested.
Right.
And when there's no baby there, there's less interest.
Right.
Does that relate?
It sounds like like that, what you and I just said about that vehicle. You're just a vehicle, and the baby, I mean, the lawyer knew to ask who has rights here. Yeah. After the baby's born, it's almost like, well, you don't have any more rights. The baby has all the rights, right? Yes. You were the vehicle to get the baby here. I don't know what spared me from that. As we're talking about it, I'm thinking I should have felt like that. I really should have, because I was literally a vehicle to get the baby here, and then the job's over, and and there was a bit of that, like, oh, the job's over. Like,
that abrupt ending.
I did choose to pump, and I chose that. I say selfishly. People challenge me when I say that word, but I felt like that's what my body wanted to do and needed to do. So I chose it for me, and then ended up giving the milk to the baby. But I think that could have helped hormonally, and also with a bit of a job after the job was over. Like, it did give me something to do. Yeah. And then I worked self-care like I've never worked it before, because I had 4 months off and my kids were in school and Dave was out. Like, I literally had the house to myself. Amazing. I literally worked self-care like it was a job. Like, I booked, like I said, the counseling appointments, physio appointments. Every day there was something for me. And those 4 months were some of the best of my life, because that's probably true self-care when we work it like a job.
Right. Exactly.
I think that saved me. I do. Yeah. I think that saved me from some of these things that maybe should have happened.
Right.
Or could have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is not everyone experiences that. I felt that transition, especially with my first, right? It's like so exciting. You're pregnant and everyone's like, are you feeling okay? Like, how are you doing? And like, people are, fussing over you. Yeah. And then you have a baby and literally no one's fussing over you.
Right. Now that all goes to the baby.
Absolutely. And then if you think too, like, you had that opportunity to recover. When we have babies, and let's say we go through major procedures or we surgically deliver the baby, and we bring that baby home, we're then expected to recover from a major surgery or major physical changes whilst caring for a newborn. But if we had, like, I always use knee surgery for some reason, but if we had a knee surgery, then you get set up with, your physiotherapist, your exercises you need to do, make sure you rest, don't do anything, et cetera, et cetera. where we're like feeding, attempting to body feed, or lifting this baby up and down, and all these
You
physical
don't
things.
recover.
You don't recover. Like, we don't have a chance.
It's impossible to fully recover. And I think that really stood out to me because I felt like I was working recovery, and it felt right.
Yeah.
It felt like what I should be doing. It didn't feel extravagant.
Right.
It felt appropriate.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so then I just thought, how do new moms do this? And it just hit me. They don't.
Yeah.
They can't. No. Right. And so the recovery just gets paused. It just, and for some women, their bodies, figure out ways to recover in other ways. And for other women, they don't, which is why sometimes 2 years later, they hit that wall of, I never really recovered.
And then potentially you add subsequent pregnancies, babies, all those things. It just adds more and more layers, right? Yeah. So after those 4 months of recovery and going back to work, what was that like for you?
That was the hardest, going back to work of all 3 pregnancies, which you would think would be strange because I wasn't leaving a baby. And the other 2 were hard to go back. Like I can remember, I'm going back next Thursday. This is my last Wednesday with the baby. This is my last. It was sad. It was hard. Where this one, it didn't feel long enough. I was like, I need more. And I don't know, maybe because I got that opportunity to work self-care like it was a job. I also realized that as a working mom, you can't work self-care like it's a job.
Right.
And so I was sad. I was grieving, like giving up that job.
Right.
So at first I grieved my surrogacy job, and then I had to grieve my self-care job.
Absolutely.
And so it was a hard return to work.
Right. Yeah. And what was the transition like for you and your partner, kind of post surrogacy job?
I think it took us a bit of time to find our way back to each other after some of the sickness and me being a bit checked out. And then the surrogacy is a job in and of itself with appointments. And so it did take us a bit to find our way back to each other and to reconnect in some ways. I don't know what else to say about that, except I do remember a friend sitting down with us even a year or 2 after the surrogacy and asking, do you think some of those things are still post surrogacy symptoms? And, I don't think we knew how big it was on our marriage, on our family, until even years later when things were just popping up. And it was like, oh, right. We did go through that thing. We did have to survive there for a little while, and there's going to be impacts.
Right. And again, so interesting that even like couples counseling is not part of a surrogacy journey. Right. For the carrier. Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. So can I ask, and you don't have to answer, but what is your relationship like now with that family? Is there a relationship, or did you guys decide not to have a relationship? What's that been like?
Part of the conversation was expectations around that. And because we didn't know them before choosing to do this, we decided to let it happen organically. So it was kind of like, we're not going to force anything, but for the first couple of years of the baby's life, my brother still lived next door to them. So we would see the baby and just let it happen organically like that. But my brother has since moved, so we don't see them naturally. And we all decided not to force it. So we do text. On Mother's Day, they'll send a little text that just says thank you, or on her birthday, they'll send a updated photo, which my kids love seeing. So there's little, and if we ever wanted to check in, like, how's the baby, or we can. It's an open invitation both ways to check in on each other. But that's how we set it up on purpose. And it's what feels right for sure for me. Like I don't want to force anything.
Right.
And I think they'll tell because when we were meeting with a social worker all together, one of the suggestions was to share the baby's story right from the get-go, because any stories that are told to kids before the age of 3, the story grows with them. It never has to enter into their formed brain, and the brain has to decide where to sort it. It just was always there, so it doesn't have to get sorted. Right. So they suggested to the parents just to always say how she was born. Right. So I'm pretty sure that she knows, and maybe she'll choose to meet me one day, and I would be more than happy to have that happen. But I'm just up for whatever feels organic and natural.
Right. Yeah. And I guess kind of like you said, right? Again, I'm hearing these like super healthy boundaries, right? Of you guys having those conversations, setting those expectations all together, and, doing what sits right for you.
Yeah.
Right. Like that it's not forced. It's not out of my control or something that I don't want. This feels organic and right for us. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, all these years out and having kind of really broken down this story and like really kind of explored it, how does it feel? Like, what is it kind of like to reflect on that and that incredible act of service that you did and your family did?
It feels important. So thank you for asking me to do this. When you asked me, I thought, sure, like it does. It's not hard for me to talk about, sure, but I didn't feel anything more than that besides a sure. But now that we've had this conversation, I feel more than a sure. I feel like honored. I feel that it's given a voice to a story that can easily just become a side story. It's something we did. It's something we are so open to talking about, but we've moved since then. Some people don't even know we did this. It can be easily forgotten. And so just having this time with you today to remember, it's done something special for me.
Oh, I'm so glad. And well, it's something you can keep too, right? Like if you wanted to, it's something you could keep and your girls maybe could listen to it one day, or, maybe Dave could listen to it. But it's something that, because it is part of your story, a big part, right? And an important part, and definitely something that I think is so important to be honored and talked about and celebrated. So anytime you want to talk about it, just tell me.
Give you a call.
Yes, absolutely.
I know you like when people randomly call you.
Right. Don't call me, text me.
Right.
And we'll set up a Zoom meeting.
Okay, perfect.
So can I just ask you to clarify for listeners, people that are not familiar with the surrogacy world or gestational carriers, could you just give us a couple of definitions or like the appropriate language that we should be using? For example, what is a gestational carrier, surrogate, intended parent? You were saying that throughout the show. Could you just explain that language and those terms for us?
Okay. So a gestational carrier is what I did, which is when you use the fully formed embryo and that is transferred into my cervix or my body. And so I become the gestational carrier for that embryo's gestation. Okay. A surrogate, there's a word that comes before. A traditional surrogate is when you use the female egg and that same female body to carry the embryo or the fetus. And a gestational surrogate could also use an embryo that's not the intended parent's
Right. So a donated embryo.
A donated embryo,
Yep.
donated egg
Egg.
with
Okay.
maybe one of the parents' sperm or one of the parents' egg. But the
Right.
gestational carrier means that the embryo has been transferred in as a fully formed embryo. A traditional surrogate means that you're using your egg and your cervix.
Okay. And would that be done through IVF, or is that sometimes done with IUI?
That is a very good question. In our experience, these embryos were already frozen and ready. So it was more similar to IVF, except didn't require the extraction.
Right.
Where I imagine a traditional surrogate could use IUI or would use, because it's
Less procedures,
less procedures.
risky.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
And
intended parents is just used for the parents who are intending to, because legally, in the eyes of the law, the woman does have all the rights and does actually have rights to the baby before the baby's born.
okay.
So up until recently, I think even when we were doing this in 2016, 2017, intended parents were having to adopt the baby back
Post-birth.
post-birth.
Right.
So that did start changing. And I don't know, I haven't kept up with research on it, but
Right.
yeah. So in the eyes of the law, that's why they use the word intended parent, because they're intending
Right.
to, and so biological parent might not make sense because it might not be their
Biological.
baby.
Right.
So intended
Okay.
parent is just a way to kind of capture the person who intends to raise this child.
Right. Okay. And so then I would imagine traditional surrogacy, there's potentially more room for like complications in terms of setting those realistic expectations, those healthy boundaries, working all those things out with lawyers and things like that, because the egg belongs to the carrier.
Yeah. I can only imagine that does add quite a few more layers. Like I said, that's something I knew I couldn't do. But there's lots of women who can. And I think that's amazing. And just, yes, requires even more conversations, even more legal contracts. You sign quite a few contracts to make sure that this all goes the way everyone's intending. And especially because of that legal loophole where it belongs to the woman who's carrying it until birth, when, so I think before you'd have to go to court.
Right.
And so even if, we've all heard the horror stories, right? Where sometimes it doesn't go the way all the contracts said it would go.
Right.
And that's because of the law. So I think it's getting better. But it's, for us, it was smooth sailing, and I'm thankful because you can hear some of those horror stories where it doesn't go the way everyone thought it would go.
Absolutely. So I would love to know, what advice would you give to people who are thinking about becoming gestational carriers or traditional surrogates?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm getting asked the question that I asked to the person who kind of mentored me. So I would give her same advice, which is go see your doctor and just get a health check so that you know where your body is at. I think that just gives you, it's almost like a working baseline, and to know if the pregnancy did end up causing anything, just so that you're aware, you're informed. So do that. And it's another eyes on you, right? It's another set of eyes to watch for how you're doing. find someone who can support you, who's been through it. So whether you belong to an agency or you reach out to someone else who has done it, or a support group, just so that you can ask some of those questions that maybe only someone who's been through it could answer.
Right.
And make sure that you have support even outside of just natural support. People who are going to check in on you. Like my mom cleaned my house when I was super sick, and a group of friends threw a baby shower for me, or a pregnancy shower. It was just so sweet. Yeah, there was just really lovely things that I think just having support makes all the difference.
Right.
And then don't hesitate to reach out for help and get that counseling lined up. And as much as you can't get paid to be a surrogate in Canada, you can you can submit expenses. So if you require counseling, you can get that all worked out in the contract, that those kind of things are reimbursed, so that you get the support that you need.
And would you say that, like, would you suggest every surrogate or gestational carrier to get a counselor?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Right.
Like I said, my counseling didn't end up processing,
right,
but it brought up other things, which happens, right? One situation triggers another situation.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't give up the counseling that I did post-surrogacy. Actually, in hindsight, I should have probably done it throughout the pregnancy, throughout the sickness. I probably should have done more.
Well, hindsight's 2020. And also, like, you're putting that on yourself. However, the system did not support that, right?
Yeah.
Like, any of those staff members that you were in contact throughout this whole journey, no one suggested that to you. And that's not your fault.
Right.
Right. Those supports are not there, which is
right. They're not built in.
Yes, exactly. Which again is mind blowing. I know the system is lacking, but it's just mind blowing to think that you went through this like massive thing that you did, and that mental health support was not there. And luckily, you knew enough to set that up for yourself, but a lot of people don't. Right. Or even maybe know like that they could expense that or ask for that, maybe a lot of times with pregnancy, like everyone's just so focused on the physical again, right? Because the baby's in there.
Right.
Yeah. What would you like to see in support systems, like in the actual healthcare system, set up for people on a surrogate or gestational carrier journey?
Maybe just regular checks. Like you said, it's not built into the system. What would it take to get it built into the system? And I don't think it would be a lot. I think having just regular, for a while I belonged to the hospital in London because that's who did the transfer. And so while I belong there, but then I guess there's a big chunk of time where you belong to no one. Well, that's not true, because I guess it would be the hospital that did the transfer, and then it was the midwives, and then the hospital, and then back to the midwives. So maybe just healthy communication between all the different doctors and just regular checks that kind of follow you, like who checked Katie at 2 weeks, who checked Katie at 4 weeks, who checked Katie at 2 weeks postpartum, who checked her, like just that it's kind of follows you and that it's built into the system. And it's not just, hey, how are you? Even though that's a really good question, but maybe it's an assessment that knows to ask the deeper questions of, but how are you really? Like even today here, I was asked more in-depth questions than I was from a health professional through the whole and pregnancy and following. So
I'm very
kudos
nosy.
to you. Kudos to you.
I like to know it all.
But it's helpful. It's sharing story and sharing we're counselors. We believe in sharing story, but
Absolutely.
I'm feeling it today. I'm feeling that like being asked the right questions or even just good questions has power. And so how can that be built into the system?
Right. Right. And I'm wondering too, like, who checks Katie at 6 months
Right.
postpartum, right? Or 1 year postpartum, like that anniversary,
Yeah.
right? And what comes up around that, you
Yeah.
know? And those are, I think, some just important checkpoints, because also we know postpartum mental health issues don't necessarily turn up, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month postpartum.
Right.
I've had people recognize their symptoms at 13 months postpartum,
Right.
or 18 months postpartum when they're pregnant with their second. And then
Right.
they're like, oh, wait, something's going on here.
Right.
Right. So, like you said, there's like a lot of room and opportunity for someone like yourself where there was no one checking on you,
Right.
that something could have been missed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, final question. What was the anniversary of the delivery like for you? Did you recognize it, acknowledge it? How was that for you?
I actually can't forget that date. So it obviously settled into my body. It has meaning. And it's her birthday. So I always send her a little birthday wish. But it's also, I always say to moms, it's their birthday. They gave birth. And so I still feel that day. My body remembers whether I choose to or not. And it's a happy feeling. It's like today has been, it's an honoring of that story. It's the one day in the year where it for sure will come back to mind, because I can forget that I did this. Right. But that's one day of the year where I can't forget. And I think that's sometimes those traumatic anniversaries, sometimes a traumatic anniversary is unfortunate because our bodies can't forget. But this is one of those I can't forget. And it's a good thing because I don't want it to be forgotten.
Absolutely. Katie, thank you so much for sharing your story in this like real, beautiful, authentic way. I learned so much today, and I think that the audience is going to take away so much from your story. And I'm just feeling like a really full heart. You did an amazing thing. And I'm so grateful that you shared that with me today. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for all that you do for women, for families, for moms, dads.
Thank you. I am so lucky that I get to listen and share these stories with you and make new friends and talk to dear friends about their experiences. I loved hearing Katie's story about her surrogacy journey, and I learned so much. On this World Maternal Mental Health Day, I'm reflecting on my journey with postpartum depression and anxiety, and it was definitely the hardest time of my life. However, I recovered, and I'm here today helping to support others with similar struggles and sharing these raw, authentic stories. Today, my heart is full of gratitude. Thank you all so much for listening and supporting the podcast and Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with any of your friends or family members who may benefit from it. If you feel you are experiencing any of the symptoms or issues that we discussed today, please reach out to any one of your supports. You can also go to perinatalwellbeing.ca for more information, blog posts, and podcast episodes. Check out our new episode every Wednesday.